Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow who enjoys facts, ancient technologies, and things that evolve over millennia with barely any fanfare. But, not to forget, things that evolve quicker as well. Now, I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in human invention. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those sleepy little times when I am not. But even then, I simply continue drifting, like wind-worn dust on a Stone Age breeze. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know. What is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode of The Origins of Human Technology. Let us begin our journey, not with a bang, but with a flicker. Control of fire. A sleepy spark in the soft dark of early time. Somewhere between 500,000 and 200,000 years before the year we call today. It was not a discovery, no, not a lightning strike to the mind. It was a slow taming, a watching of flames, perhaps from trees set aglow by storms, and a very gradual realization that warmth could be held, not just felt. Archaeological whispers from ancient hearths, ashes gently buried in caves like Thucaudian in China, tell us fire was not only feared, it was fed, controlled, and coddled. Hearths were not yet fireplaces. No chimneys, no bricks, but scooped depressions, lined with cracked stones, sometimes ringed in soot. A place not just to cook, but to sit, and stare, and wait. Fire, you see, doesn't rush. And neither did we. Now let us drift, ever so slowly, to the sharpening of stones. Between 300,000 and 100,000 years ago, humans, and perhaps those who came just before, began the rhythmic ritual of shaping stone into something more purposeful. A sharp edge. And not just any edge. Carefully flaked flakes, worked with patient percussion. The Acheulean hand axe. So often symmetrical. Not for beauty, perhaps, but because the brain finds comfort in balance. A bifacial leaf of stone, chipped by hours of tapping, of choosing the right strike, the right angle. The tool wasn't fast to make, but it was durable, and could slice through sinew, or scrape hide, or crack a marrow-filled bone. In some regions, tools remained unchanged for tens of thousands of years. Innovation was a sloth-like thing. As the cold edge of tools softened the world, our bond with other beings also took root. Between 11,000 and 8,000 years before now, certain animals, sheep, goats, and others, began to move closer to us, or we to them. This was not an overnight alliance, but a generations-long negotiation of proximity and trust. Wild sheep, with their twisting horns and wary eyes, slowly became woollier, tamer, and more predictable. Goats, once nimble and free, grew quieter, bred for temperament, and followed our migrations. They were not pets, not exactly, but cohabitants. Breathing companions in the long wait between seasons. The rhythm of domestication was slow, slower than anything modern minds might endure. But to those early people, it was simply life continuing. Now, if you are not yet gently drowsy, we may continue to Neolithic stone tools. Between 10,000 and 6,000 BC, something small and utterly unexciting occurred. The microlith. A tiny stone blade, often no longer than a fingernail, but expertly shaped, and precisely made. These slivers, so dull in concept, were often inserted into wood or bone shafts to create composite tools. Spears, sickles, arrows. A quiet revolution in modularity. Microliths were mass-produced, carefully shaped from stone cores, and remarkably efficient. Like the paperclip of prehistory, they were simple, repeatable, and useful, but unlikely to win anyone's heart. As the microlith sliced the silence, so too did seeds, beginning the slow domestication of plants. Between 10,000 and 8,000 BC, wild grasses, barley, wheat, lentils, were observed, gathered, and, after many quiet harvests, intentionally planted. Agriculture is not a flashy science. It is a waiting game, a test of stillness. Those first farmers, half foragers, half scientists, may not have even realized at first what they were doing. They dropped seeds, then walked away, only to return to something different. Something changed. Taller stalks, plumper grains, less bitter. The plants were not tamed by force, but by selective forgetfulness. The forgetfulness of sowing the wild ones, and remembering only the gentle ones that grew well. And then, pottery. Between 7,000 and 4,000 BC, clay, damp, sticky, dull, began to find its form as vessels. This fact is not exciting. Not even a little bit. And that is just perfect. Because early pottery wasn't painted or elegant. It was pressed into baskets, into pits, sometimes shaped by hand, smoothed with river stones, and fired, very slowly, in open pits or shallow kilns. Early Neolithic pots, cracked often, but they stored water, grains, seeds, warm soups perhaps. Their function was in their form, and their form was often quite lumpy. Now, let us turn, ever so gently, to obsidian blades. Between 7,000 and 4,000 BC, volcanic glass became a favorite among those with the patience to nap it. Obsidian is not forgiving, but when split along just the right plane, it fractures so finely that even today, some surgical blades are still made from it. In ancient times, though, it made arrowheads, knives, and ritual tools. Jet black, shiny, and sharper than the modern razor. But fragile. Always fragile. A tool for the precise. For those who moved slowly. Now we drift to something truly ponderous. The earliest observatories, between 5,000 and 2,500 BCE. Places like Nabta Playa, in what is now Egypt. A circle of stones, not unlike a sleepy Stonehenge, built by nomads who looked not down, but up, at stars. The alignments, possibly to solstices, were not perfect, but they were intentional. A stone placed here, another there. Not for decoration, but for marking time. In a world without calendars. To some, these are just rocks. But to the sleepy sloth, they are the earliest whispers of astronomy, the softest science of them all. Next, we reach bronze. Between 3,300 and 1,200 BC, the world changed not with a roar, but with a smelt. Copper, soft, warm-colored, met tin, rarer and colder. Together, in a furnace stoked slowly and watched with quiet devotion, they became bronze. Stronger, harder, yet still wonderfully workable. Tools and weapons gained a dull metallic gleam. But the real revolution was the metallurgist's notebook, invisible though it may be. A mind that remembered ratios, temperatures, cooling times. All unwritten. All passed by word, or gesture, or gaze. As the world glimmered in bronze, Another miracle crept into being. Glass. Between 3500 and 1500 BC, sand, soda, and heat melted into something translucent. Not clear, at first, but bubbly, thick, and slightly blue-green. Ancient glass was not yet for seeing through. It was for holding perfumes, for beading necklaces, for reflecting light in uneven curves. The first glassmakers were more alchemists than artisans, working with ingredients they barely understood. But still, the results shone. Not brightly, but softly, like morning fog. The wheel, a circle without beginning, and most pleasingly, without haste. Between 3500 and 3000 BC, in the cradle of what would become Mesopotamia, the first true wheels were not made for travel, but for pottery. A potter's wheel. Simple, heavy, turning slowly under human hands. Only later did this round shape lift carts and wagons across dusty soil. But those early wheels were not singular discs. They were constructed carefully, from planks, fastened and pegged, then smoothed. The axle fixed in place. The wheel rotating slowly around it. Not efficient by modern standards, but elegantly enough for oxen, and perfectly sufficient for the ancient idea of motion. Now, we glide only slightly forward, into the forge. Around 3300 to 3000 BC, humans began to experiment with bronze. Copper, soft and solitary, met tin, and together, they transformed. The result, bronze, was not just harder. It was more predictable. It held an edge longer. It could be poured into molds with a sleepy kind of precision. The alloying required patience. Too much tin, and it crumbled. Too little, and it remained too soft. So metallurgists, though they would not yet use that word, became artists of temperature and timing. Their recipes were felt, not written. But the result reshaped the quiet clatter of tools and blades across the ancient world. And where there is land, and no rain, there is irrigation. From 3000 to 1000 BC, systems of ditches and canals crept across the earth like purposeful veins. The earliest known versions came from the Sumerians, who diverted the unpredictable rivers of the Tigris and Euphrates. Canals were dug with tools of wood and bone, lined with clay, sometimes reinforced with bundled reeds. Water gates, rudimentary but effective, allowed the flow to be shared and guided. This was not a fast process. But agriculture, after all, is the domain of slowness. And irrigation extended the patience of plants into places where rain had long forgotten to fall. Now, a hush falls over our thoughts as we arrive at the art of preservation. Mummification, practiced between 2600 and 500 BC, was not a single process, but a slow evolution of techniques, born from reverence, curiosity, and the strange human wish to delay decay. The earliest mummies were simple dry burials in desert sand. But over centuries, the process became ritual. Organs removed with care, the body cleaned, and dried with natron, a natural salt. Wrapped in linen, layer upon layer, like a gentle cocoon. Sometimes resin was applied, sometimes oils. The entire process could take 70 days, or more. All to create, not immortality, but a peaceful stillness in death. A stillness that mirrors the quiet we seek in sleep. Meanwhile, in the realm of materials, a thin, rustling miracle began to emerge. Papyrus. From 2500 to 1000 BC, this reed, tall and slender, was harvested from the Nile. Its core sliced into strips. The strips laid out, horizontally and vertically, pressed together. No glue. Only plant sap and water. Then dried. Smoothed with stones. And suddenly, a surface. Not quite paper, but a beginning. Papyrus did not fold well. It cracked. But it rolled. Scrolls were born. Not for novels, but for ledgers. For lists. For liturgies. Its texture, slightly rough. A reminder that even writing can begin with the humblest plant. From writing, we turn to the soft tick of time itself. The Egyptian calendar, developed between 2500 and 1000 BC, did not have months as we know them. Instead, it had seasons, 3 of them: inundation, emergence, and harvest. Each season, 4 months. Each month, 30 days. That gave them 360 days. But the sky, always more precise than our plans, requires 365 and a bit. So they added 5 extra days, known as epigomenal days. Floating days, separate from the months. Days for gods. Or silence. The calendar was based on Sirius, the star whose rising predicted the Nile flood. Not because it was fast, but because it was reliable. And that, dear listener, was enough. And what is a calendar? Without numbers? From 2000 to 500 BC, numbers began to appear. Written down. In cuneiform. In hieroglyphs. Tally marks became symbols. Symbols gained meaning. 1 was a line. 10, a heel bone. 100, a coil of rope. Not all systems were base 10. Some, like Babylon's, used base 60, which we still echo in our clocks. Early accountants, scribes, tracked sheep, and wheat, and oil. Their calculations were not grand, but they were useful. Quietly, the written number made memory external. So we no longer had to hold it all in our sleepy heads. But slowly, oh so slowly, came understanding of things, not easily seen. Around 1900 to 200 BC, various civilizations began approximating pi. Not because they wanted to calculate infinity, but because they had circular granaries, and wells, and wheels. A ratio between circumference and diameter emerged again and again. Some used 3. Others, 3.125. The Rind Papyrus, a sleepy mathematical scroll, gives pi as roughly 3.16. Close enough. For early builders. Perfect accuracy was not required. Only repeatability. A soft, trustworthy constant, whispering through every round thing. Around 1800 to 1600 BC, the Babylonians began charting the stars. Their astronomy was not for wonder, but for omen. Yet their records, precise. Clay tablets, pressed with styluses, listed rising times, eclipses, conjunctions. They noticed patterns. Repetition. They knew Venus had a cycle. They recorded lunar eclipses going back centuries. Their math, base 60, made fractions easier. They divided the sky, not in haste, but in increments of 3. Each observation, a patient note to the future. We drift to a single, sleepy scroll. The Rind Mathematical Papyrus. Dated to 1650 BC. Named not for its writer, but its buyer. It is not a book of genius, but of exercises. Arithmetic, fractions, geometry, Practical problems, like dividing bread, or measuring a field. It shows a grasp of math not as magic, but as management. The papyrus does not marvel at numbers. It uses them carefully, as one might use a chisel, with steadiness and slowness. Let us now trickle slowly into the measurement of time by water. Between 1400 and 400 BCE, the water clock, or clepsydra, came into wider use across Egypt, Babylon, and later Greece. Its principle was delightfully simple. A vessel, either filled or emptied, at a gentle, predictable rate. Early Egyptian versions let water drip out, marking hours as the level sank. Babylonian clocks may have timed rituals or night watches. Later Greek designs, ornate and calibrated, were even used in courtrooms to measure speaking time. But always, it was time measured not by sun or sand, but by water. The gentlest of trickles, counting moments into stillness. And now, from earthbound trickles, we lift our gaze to the stars. Between 1200 and 700 BCE, Babylonian astronomers began not merely observing, but cataloging the sky with great care. They listed fixed stars, their risings, settings, and seasonal movements. These records, like the Mul.Apen texts, were not guesses, but patterns slowly uncovered. With styluses and clay, they described constellations, phases, and celestial rhythms. The stars turned overhead, slowly, reliably. And so did the scribes. They were patient. They trusted that truth would reveal itself through repetition. The heavens remained still. And yet, by watching softly, they captured motion, without moving themselves. And while the sky was studied above, the human body was being explored below. In India, between 1000 and 200 BC, surgical practices within Ayurveda took written form. The Sushruta Samhita described methods for procedures like cataract removal, wound stitching, and even nose reconstruction. Instruments were listed: hooks, scissors, forceps, each with names and purposes. This wasn't surgery as conquest, but as balance. It rested on the dashas, the vital humors of the body. Illness was imbalance. Healing was restoration. The text treated the body not as a battlefield, but as a delicate, living system, to be calmed, not conquered. In parallel, across the mountains to the east, a gentler method blossomed. Chinese acupuncture, from about 1000 to 100 BC, grew into a system of diagnosis and gentle intervention. Using needles finer than a whisper, practitioners touched invisible meridians of energy, qi, believed to flow within the body. The earliest references appear in texts like the Huangdi Neijing, which offered both technique and philosophy. This was not anatomy in the Western sense, but a flowing understanding of the body's rhythm. Pain wasn't suppressed, but coaxed to leave. Balance wasn't forced, it was invited. And healing unfolded as slowly as breath. As the body was gently tuned, so too was metal. Between 900 and 600 BCE, ironworking advanced across Eurasia. While earlier iron tools existed, now came refinement, hotter furnaces, stronger blooms, better techniques. Blacksmiths learned to control carbon, to hammer with rhythm, to quench with care. Iron was harder than bronze, but less forgiving. It needed higher temperatures. And yet, it rewarded the patient. Tools that held their edge. Weapons that withstood wear. from oar to blade, was a quiet transformation. And each blow of the hammer was a step in a process older than memory, yet still unfolding in glowing silence. Let us pause and listen to metal sing. In China, between 800 and 600 BC, bronze bells were not just cast, but tuned. The bo and zhong bells, large, elegant, and often part of musical sets, were shaped with acoustic precision. Some could produce two pitches, depending on where they were struck. Tuning required subtle adjustments to thickness, curve, and rim tension. There were no electronic tools, just artisans, working by ear and eye. These bells did not clatter. They resonated. They called not to arms, but to harmony. Their sound was not loud, but long. And in its tone was the shape of stillness. And once again, we return to the soft medicine of thought. Between 700 and 200 BC, Ayurveda shifted from oral tradition to formal text. The Karaka Samhita focused less on surgery and more on internal balance. It prescribed diet, herbs, rituals, all suited to the unique composition of the individual. Healing was not a one-size effort. It flowed with season, age, emotion. Ailments were not fought, but listened to. Descriptions ran long. Language meandered like a stream. And in this slow attention to detail, the mind and body found alignment. Not perfect health, but gentle restoration. Like morning dew returning to a leaf. Back in Babylon, from 700 to 100 BCE, a quieter kind of astronomy unfolded. The astronomical diaries, clay tablets filled with daily notations, tracked lunar cycles, planetary movements, and even the prices of barley and the levels of the Euphrates. Each line, a soft whisper from the sky to the earth. These diaries weren't predictions, they were records. Slow, methodical, continuous. Written in cuneiform, and pressed gently into clay, they formed one of the longest-running scientific records in human history. They did not marvel at the stars. They measured them. And in the act of recording, they brought the heavens a little closer to stillness. At roughly the same time, in the Greek world, thought took a turn inward. From 600 to 500 BC, natural philosophers like Thales and Anaximander began to wonder not just how, but why. What underlies all things? Could water be the first substance? Or something boundless and unseen, the apparent? These were not tests, but ideas. Offered slowly. Discussed gently. They didn't aim for certainty. They sought structure within change. The physical world, they believed, had reason, not chaos. Fire, air, earth, and water became more than elements. They became metaphors. And slowly, the idea of nature became something to contemplate, not simply endure. And as ideas formed, one became a quiet equation. The Pythagorean theorem, from 500 to 400 BC, states that in a right triangle, the square of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the other two sides. Simple. Elegant. Silent. Though traces of this knowledge exist in older Babylonian tablets, it was Pythagoras who gave it voice. This theorem helped architects and builders. But more than that, it soothed minds. Its certainty was restful. Its shape, calming. A triangle, balanced. A rule that never faltered. In a noisy world, it whispered logic. And in that whisper was the comfort of clarity. Just as the earth itself began to change shape in our understanding. From 500 to 350 BC, thinkers like Pythagoras and Aristotle began to describe the earth not as flat, but as a sphere. Evidence came from eclipses, where the earth cast a curved shadow on the moon, and from seeing new stars when traveling south. Ships disappeared hull first over the horizon. Slowly, gently, a round earth replaced a flat one. It was not a revolution, but a rotation. The earth turning calmly, and the sky receiving it. A globe resting in a universe no longer frightening, only vast, and slowly known. A whisper of the smallest things. From 450 to 370 BC, Democritus proposed that all matter was made of indivisible particles, atomos, not molecules, not protons, but something tiny and eternal. He imagined these atoms joining and separating, forming all things: air, water, stone, even thought. He could not see them, but he believed. Between each atom was void, a silence between all things. The world, he said, was not magic. It was made of structure. Invisible, but ever present. Like grains of sand in a vast, quiet desert. He saw complexity, and named it simple. And in that quiet, the idea of atoms began. Around 400 to 370 BC, medicine took a gentler turn. The Hippocratic Oath began to circulate among healers in the Greek world. Not a law, but a promise. To do no harm. To respect the ill. To act not from ego, but from care. Physicians were urged to be quiet custodians of life, not masters of it. The oath bound them to modesty, to cleanliness, to secrecy. It spoke of limits, of restraint. There were gods named, yes, but also ethics. And in that slow transition, healing became more than treatment. It became trust. And medicine began to carry a whisper of conscience. At the same quiet moment, the Hippocratic corpus emerged. Between 400 and 370 BC, a collection of over 60 medical texts began to circulate, rational, observational, and tender. Diseases were no longer blamed on spirits or whims, but on imbalances. The body, they believed, held humors, blood, phlegm, bile, each in delicate proportion. Sickness was simply imbalance. Diagnosis required patience. Prognosis demanded humility. Treatments favored rest, diet, and gentle intervention. These texts didn't aim to conquer illness. They aimed to understand it. Slowly. From case to case. They turned the human body into a soft puzzle. And began, at last, to study it with listening hands. Now, let us lift water upward. With a twist. The Archimedean screw, dating from around 300 to 200 BC, was a simple device, yet profoundly elegant. A helical blade inside a cylinder, turned by hand, gently lifting water as it rotated. Used to irrigate fields, or drain lowlands, it functioned without pumps, wires, or haste. Its design was durable, yet quiet. Smooth. Repetitive. Like winding a watch, or grinding grain. And though it bears Archimedes' name, it may have existed before him. No matter. Its spiral logic remains the same, to move water upward. Not violently, but patiently. A tool that mirrored the slowness of rain. And slowly, lines became law. Around 300 BC, Euclid of Alexandria gathered centuries of geometric thought, and offered elements, a structure of points, lines, planes, all from a few simple axioms. Geometry became not just drawings, but proofs. Step by step. Silent logic. No leaps. Just progression. Euclid's geometry wasn't rushed. It unfolded like petals. Each theorem built on the last. A world of triangles, circles, and parallel lines. All behaving, all balanced. It was mathematics not as mystery, but as architecture. You could walk through it. Rest inside it. And in its calm, steady logic, find a kind of peace. Then, a gentle law was noticed. Around 250 to 212 BC, Archimedes, tinkerer of thoughts, realized that a floating body displaces its own weight in fluid. This is now called Archimedes' principle. But to him, it was simply observation. A crown, tested in water. A question of gold, answered not with fire, but with buoyancy. This principle, though mathematical, is not sharp. It is soft. It explains why ships float, why balance is possible. It connects mass and fluid, with stillness. It is not about motion. It is about resting. Suspended. Supported. the mathematics of floating, gently made visible. As we drift forward, we find ourselves amid stone and ash. From 200 BC to 100 CE, Roman engineers refined a material both strong and subtle: pozzolanic concrete. Made from volcanic ash, lime, and rubble, it could set underwater and last for centuries. They poured it into molds for harbors, domes, and walls. Unlike stone, it did not need to be carved. It conformed. It cured. Slowly. Over days. Its strength grew with time. Its secrets were not entirely understood, even by those who used it. And yet, it endured. A quiet triumph of chemistry, hardened by patience and ash. Now, very gently, gears begin to turn. Between 150 and 100 BC, mechanical gearing in ancient Greece reached astonishing subtlety. In forgotten workshops, artisans shaped interlocking teeth of bronze. Not for clocks, but for calendars. The Antikythera mechanism, discovered centuries later in a shipwreck, shows this craft. A machine with over 30 gears, turning the heavens into numbers, the sun, the moon, eclipses, all mapped. Slowly. Elegantly. There was no electricity. No motor. Just ratio and rotation. This was not a toy. It was a cosmic whisper, rendered in bronze, and wound by hand. By 100 BC, that very mechanism, the Antikythera, stood as the first known analog computer. It predicted solar and lunar cycles, displayed zodiac positions, tracked the 4-year Olympiad. Its builders had no telescopes, no digital screens, but they had math and metal and time. The front displayed the heavens, the back, eclipses. It turned, not in seconds, but in seasons. A machine of thought, disguised as a box of gears. And though it was lost to the sea, it speaks now, in fragments, softly. Like a calendar carved into the stars. And softly still, numbers traveled. From India, between 500 and 700 CE, a system of counting, Arabic numerals, began to migrate westward. 0, 1, 2. Shapes with place value. Compact. Reusable. Easier to calculate within Roman letters. They were adopted slowly, not all at once. Traders, scholars, calculators, each turning curved symbols into soft logic. The 0, a symbol of absence, became the foundation of presence. The shape of silence enabled vast computation. These digits were not loud, but they carried everything. And the world began, quietly, to add, subtract, and imagine. Meanwhile, a gentle spark. Between 800 and 900 CE, in China, early formulas for gunpowder emerged. Charcoal, sulfur, saltpeter, mixed in precise proportions. At first, it wasn't for weapons. It was for fireworks. For experiments. For alchemy. Its first uses were playful, curious. But the potential lingered like smoke. A substance that burned without flame, that hissed instead of roared. These recipes were written down and refined. Powdered chemistry that shimmered into existence, not as thunder, but as transformation. And even now, the first flickers of it remain quietly in history's hand. And as the eye is drawn to flame, another turns to light itself. From 850 to 870 CE, in the Islamic Golden Age, the philosopher Al-Kindi studied optics. He asked how light travels, how mirrors reflect, how vision occurs. His work combined Greek philosophy with Arabic clarity. He wrote not to dazzle, but to explain. Rays, angles, reflection. He used geometry to model how light behaves. His observations were early, but careful. Not experiments in our sense, but explorations of how sight might be mapped. His mind turned gently to vision, and found laws where others saw only light. Like a needle drawn to true north, we arrive at the magnetic compass. Between 900 and 1100 CE, in China, lodestones were suspended or floated. And they turned, always, toward the same direction. South, at first. Later, north. Mariners began to trust them. Not fully, but enough. Compass needles didn't speak. They pointed. Silently. Predictably. In a fog, or under stars unseen, the compass still turned. It required no wind, no sun, just Earth's own invisible field, pulling metal softly home. A guide, not with voice, but with silence. Between 1200 and 1300, across the vast, windswept expanses of the Mongol Empire, a postal relay system known as the Yam came into being. This was not a modern post. It was a string of stations, spaced every 25 to 30 miles. Riders passed messages like soft batons, swift horses waiting, ready, fed. Supplies were stored, paths mapped. Even the Khan's seal accompanied some dispatches. Messages traveled across thousands of miles, without haste, yet without pause. It was not just a network. It was a quiet river of information, flowing through steppes and deserts. The yam made the vast world feel softly connected. Now let us lift our gaze back to the sky. In the mid-13th century, between 1247 and 1274, Persian astronomer Nasir al-Din al-Tusi proposed a model of planetary motion known as the Tusi couple. It was a geometric solution, two circles, one turning inside the other, to produce linear motion. No epicycles. No divine push. Just curves, folding into each other. This elegant construction explained oscillating motion, without contradicting the principles of a rotating universe. It would later echo in Copernican thought. But here, it was a quiet whisper of planetary elegance, rotating endlessly, inside the margins of starlight. And slowly, very slowly, the scientific method began to take shape. From 1250 to 1280, thinkers like Roger Bacon and Robert Grosseteste urged not just belief, but observation. They proposed a cycle: observe, hypothesize, test, conclude. Grosseteste spoke of induction, of generalizing from particulars. Bacon emphasized repeatable experiments. Neither worked with microscopes or labs, but with light, lenses, and careful doubt. They laid no hard rules, only soft beginnings. Their method was not urgent. It was circular, self-correcting, a spiral of knowledge, returning always to the evidence. As understanding deepened, so did timekeeping. Between 1275 and 1300, mechanical clocks emerged in Europe. No longer reliant on sun, sand, or dripping water, these clocks used escapements, tiny mechanisms that regulated motion. Iron gears turned. Weights dropped. Bells chimed. The rhythm was steady, if not precise. They marked hours, not seconds. Their purpose was not accuracy, but regularity. Church bells rang on time. Work and worship aligned to these turning wheels. These first clocks were towers of noise, but built on silence. They turned, even when no one watched. And in their ticking, they quietly shaped the rhythm of the waking world. And when danger stirred, slowness became protection. In 1377, the Adriatic port of Ragusa, now Dubrovnik, enacted the first official quarantine. Incoming ships were held for 30 days. Later extended to 40. Quaranta giorni, a term meaning 40 days, gave us the word. It wasn't punishment. It was precaution. The plague, unseen, required space. Time. Isolation not as cruelty, but as careful stillness. Goods were held. People were monitored. This pause saved lives. And it showed that even in crisis, slowness might be wisdom. Now, drifting forward to a quiet turning point. In 1637, René Descartes published La Géométrie, laying foundations for algebraic geometry. He showed that equations could describe curves, that numbers could live in space. A parabola was no longer just a shape, it was an expression. A line could be named with a formula. This was not flash. It was fusion. Algebra met geometry, and the two began to dance. Slowly. In diagrams and coordinates. The Cartesian plane gave the invisible a place to rest. And from this resting, infinite shapes could rise. In the skies, gravity began to gather form. Between 1684 and 1687, Isaac Newton, with encouragement from Edmund Halley, formulated the laws of planetary gravity. An apple did not fall with magic. It fell with mathematics. The same force that pulled fruit downward held the moon in orbit. His equations were not rushed. They were carved, tested, and reasoned. In his Principia Mathematica, motion became understandable. The heavens obeyed the same rules as stones. And gravity, once a mystery, became a constant companion, silent, invisible, but always gently pulling. Now, let us glide into fluid things. Between 1757 and 1822, thinkers like Leonhard Euler and Claude Louis Navier, later with George Gabriel Stokes, gave form to fluid dynamics. Their equations described how water flows, how air moves, how clouds billow. The Navier-Stokes equations, slow to solve, remain unsolved in some ways. But they capture turbulence, viscosity, pressure. These were not just numbers. They were whispers of rivers, simulations of air's caress. Fluids, once impossible to describe, found expression in mathematics that curled and meandered, like water itself, and when things move, they vibrate. Between 1760 and 1800, figures like Daniel Bernoulli and Joseph Fourier explored sound, not as magic, but as wave. Bernoulli used strings and air columns. Fourier decomposed vibrations into simpler patterns, sine waves. Each tone, a sum of softer waves. This was not sound to be heard. It was to be described. A violin's note, a breeze's whistle, could be broken down, quietly, into math. A song, rendered not in feeling, but in frequency, and in that wave, was a kind of hush. The hush of understanding. Then, something even softer, protection. Between 1796 and 1798, Edward Jenner tested an idea. Cowpox, a mild disease, seemed to protect milkmaids from smallpox. He inoculated a boy. Then tested smallpox. The boy did not sicken. It was the beginning of vaccination. The idea: to provoke the body gently, before danger arrived. No pills. No potions. just preparation. The immune system, taught softly. And humanity, quietly armed with memory. A whisper of illness, so that silence could follow. And now, to machines of thought. From 1837 to 1871, Charles Babbage designed the analytical engine. It was never completed. But it was imagined, deeply. Gears, that could follow instructions. Punch cards, that could store programs. A memory unit. A processor. It was not for calculation alone, but for logic. Babbage dreamed of automation, of engines that could think slowly, mechanically. Ada Lovelace, his collaborator, saw its promise, not in numbers, but in ideas. It was a computer, made of brass. And it turned, in theory, with the slow rhythm of foresight. Now, we arrive at the quiet science of causation. Between 1876 and 1890, Robert Koch outlined 4 postulates to determine whether a microorganism caused a disease. Each postulate, a step. Isolate. Culture. Reinfect. Re-isolate. It was methodical. It was testable. Tuberculosis, anthrax, cholera, slowly surrendered to this process. Koch's work brought precision to something once clouded in fear. Disease was not fate. It was causality. His microscope did not scream. It confirmed. Softly. And medicine found structure where once there had been only shadows. In 1901, the blood, that most familiar of mysteries, became just a little less mysterious. Karl Landsteiner, an Austrian physician, discovered that blood was not all alike. It had types A, B, AB, and O. Mixing them, he noticed, sometimes caused clotting. Sometimes nothing at all. These types were determined by tiny antigens, resting on the surface of red blood cells. Not visible. Not felt. But present. The immune system, so quiet and watchful, noticed them. And when it saw a foreign type, it sometimes reacted. Understanding blood types allowed for safer transfusions. A soft pairing of science with survival. Only a few years later, in 1905, a peculiar thing happened when light struck metal. It released electrons. Not slowly, as waves might suggest, but instantaneously, as if in packets. Albert Einstein explained this phenomenon, the photoelectric effect, by suggesting that light behaved like particles, which he called quanta. It was not smooth. It was granular. Discrete. This was not the physics of apples and levers, but of sparks. A single photon could liberate an electron. Light, once thought to be a wave, was also something else, not contradictory. Just more complete. A quiet duality, flickering between certainty and surprise. From 1907 to 1915, Einstein continued his thoughtful unfolding. He expanded special relativity into a general theory. A theory of gravity, not as a force, but as curvature. Mass bends space, and space guides mass. The presence of a star makes the very fabric of the cosmos dip, like a ball on a stretched sheet. Time slows near gravity. Light bends. Planets follow curves, not because they are pulled, but because space tells them how to move. General relativity was not a correction. It was a soft revolution. Space and time united. And the universe tilted ever so slightly into elegance. In that same window of quiet revelation, between 1909 and 1911, Ernest Rutherford performed a simple experiment. He fired alpha particles at a thin gold foil. Most passed through, but a few bounced back. Something dense, something small, must have been inside the atom. And so he proposed the nucleus. A tiny, central core, surrounded by vast emptiness. The atom, mostly void. Its mass, huddled at the center. It was not an explosion. Just a conclusion. That within the seeming stillness, something heavy, something definite, was waiting. And in 1911, as thoughts still orbited the atom, something even colder was noticed. Heike Kamerling's discovered superconductivity. When certain materials were cooled near absolute zero, they lost all electrical resistance. Current flowed forever, without fading. No heat. No loss. Just movement, eternal and effortless. This was not expected. Metals, at low temperatures, should resist less. But not none. Yet here, resistance vanished. A circuit turned to silence. And the chill of liquid helium revealed a new kind of order. That same year, in the shifting crust beneath our feet, a puzzle began. In 1912, Alfred Wegener suggested that continents drifted. That Africa and South America once fit together. But it took decades, until the 1960s, for plate tectonics to be fully accepted. Seafloor spreading. Subduction zones. Magnetic stripes in basalt. The Earth, it turned out, was not static. It moved. Slowly. In centimeters per year. The continents, not fixed, but floating on molten layers. The world was not stable. But it was rhythmic. Its changes, measurable only in deep time. And in 1913, another atomic refinement arrived. Niels Bohr proposed that electrons didn't spiral into the nucleus, but orbited in discrete shells, like planets, but with jumps. Electrons could move between levels, but only by absorbing or releasing specific quanta of energy. Light was not continuous. It came in lines. Spectra. This model was not final, but it was helpful. It gave the atom structure, predictability, a stage for the strange dance of the subatomic, where particles moved in leaps, not strolls. In 1925, Wolfgang Pauli introduced a soft limit to these electrons, the Pauli exclusion principle. It stated that no two fermions, like electrons, could occupy the same quantum state. In simple terms, each electron required its own space, its own spin, energy, orbit. No sharing. No crowding. This principle created the architecture of atoms. Why matter has structure. Why chemistry has rules. It was not dramatic, but it was decisive. A law that whispered, only one per place. And then, a wave. In 1926, Erwin Schrödinger described the behavior of electrons with an equation. A wave equation. It did not tell where an electron was, but where it might be. A cloud of probability. Not a point, but a shape. The Schrödinger equation did not shout. It hummed. It allowed prediction, without knowing. Understanding, without seeing. It became the quiet backbone of quantum mechanics. And in its symbols, the strange softness of matter came into view. In 1927, Werner Heisenberg added a final layer of uncertainty. He showed, you cannot know both a particle's position and momentum exactly at the same time. The more precisely one is known, the fuzzier the other becomes. This was not a flaw in measurement. It was a feature of nature. The uncertainty principle didn't say we are clumsy. It said the world is woven with limits. Precision, it turned out, has a cost. And beneath everything is a kind of hush. That same year, a delicate experiment confirmed it. Electron diffraction. When a beam of electrons passed through a crystal, it created a pattern of interference. Like waves. Even though electrons are particles, they behaved like ripples. This duality, particle and wave, was no longer just theory. It was evidence. A mark on a screen. Matter was not simple. It was complex. and its complexity, arrived not with noise, but with pattern, a silent fingerprint, left by the tiniest of travelers. And just a breath later, in 1928, a petri dish was forgotten. Alexander Fleming noticed that a mold, Penicillium, not only lived on it, but cleared the surrounding bacteria. The mold secreted a substance, penicillin, the first true antibiotic. It would take over a decade to isolate and purify. But once it was ready, it changed everything. Infections that once lingered receded. The body, no longer alone in its fight. Nature had quietly provided a medicine, in a most modest place, a dish, a speck, a mold, with a message. In 1932, James Chadwick discovered the neutron, an uncharged particle resting peacefully alongside the proton in the atomic nucleus. Unlike the charged proton, the neutron carried no electric weight, but it contributed mass, holding the nucleus together like invisible glue. This particle explained the existence of isotopes, atoms with the same protons but different neutrons. Its discovery was subtle, detected through experiments where particles were gently bounced off beryllium. The neutron's presence explained stability and decay. It did not shout. It whispered secrets about the heart of matter itself. A silent participant in the atomic dance. Moving quietly forward, during the years 1943 and 1944, scientists developed antibiotics beyond penicillin, most notably streptomycin. Isolated from soil bacteria, Streptomyces griseus, streptomycin marked the first effective treatment against tuberculosis, a persistent scourge. This molecule worked by interrupting bacterial protein synthesis, slowing microbial life without harming human cells. It was not an instant cure. Treatments required patience and extended dosing. But this progress was monumental, a widening of nature's pharmacopoeia, drawn from Earth itself, offering hope through slow, steady healing. From 1944 stretching into 1970, the Green Revolution unfolded, an era quietly transforming agriculture. Norman Borlaug bred wheat strains that grew taller, resisted disease, and produced abundant grain. These semi-dwarf varieties responded well to fertilizers and irrigation. Fields once limited by natural yield began producing more, feeding millions. The work was painstaking, crossbreeding, testing, adapting. Not a sudden leap, but a gradual crescendo. It reshaped society softly, through quiet fields and patient farmers. The revolution was green, not noisy. It was a whisper in wheat stalks, bending under the weight of grain. Just a few years later, in 1947 and 1948, the transistor was born, created by John Bardeen, Walter Braddon, and William Shockley at Bell Labs. This small device could amplify and switch electrical signals, made from semiconductors like germanium. Its invention replaced bulky vacuum tubes with tiny, solid-state components. Transistors worked silently, with no filament to glow or burn out. Their switching speed was rapid but imperceptible. They formed the foundation for modern electronics. Their quiet efficiency ushered in an age of miniaturization. A revolution in silence, woven into every circuit. Between 1948 and 1964, theoretical predictions about the cosmic microwave background, CMB, gently took shape. This radiation, left over from the early universe's hot, dense phase, was predicted as a faint, uniform glow permeating space. It was not visible to the naked eye, but detectable with sensitive radio telescopes. The CMB's temperature measured just a few degrees above absolute zero, a soft whisper from 13.8 billion years ago. Its uniformity and tiny fluctuations mapped the large-scale structure of the cosmos. This relic radiation was a delicate echo, a lullaby sung by the universe itself. In the early 1950s, between 1951 and 1953, James Watson and Francis Crick, aided by Rosalind Franklin's X-ray images, described DNA's double helix structure. This elegant ladder-like molecule carried genetic instructions. Two strands twisted around each other, held by base pairs, adenine with thymine, cytosine with guanine. The pairing was precise, complementary, allowing replication. DNA was not a random coil. It was a structured manuscript, softly encoding life's instructions. Its form explained heredity, stability and change. A beautiful, slow from 1951 through 1960, the birth control pill quietly emerged in laboratories and clinics. Chemists synthesized synthetic hormones, progestins and estrogens, that could regulate fertility by mimicking the body's natural signals. Taken orally, these pills prevented ovulation. Their invention was met with cautious hope. It offered control over reproduction, slowly shifting societal norms. The pill was a chemical whisper, working through hormonal cycles. Not loud, not abrupt, but profoundly influential in its steady, measured effect. Between 1952 and 1955, Jonas Salk developed the polio vaccine. Polio, a crippling viral disease, had plagued children for decades. Salk used an inactivated, killed, virus approach, introducing it to the immune system without causing disease. Immunity built slowly, through the body's natural defenses. Mass vaccination campaigns followed, reducing polio incidence dramatically. This was not magic. It was methodical. A patient alliance between medicine and immunity. The vaccine became a shield, quietly lowering the hum of epidemic fear. In 1954, the first successful organ transplant took place, a kidney shared between identical twins. The operation was painstaking and fraught with risk. Immune rejection was a looming threat. Matching tissue types, careful surgery, and immunosuppressive protocols combined to produce a functioning kidney. It was not a triumph of speed but of precision, endurance, and hope. This surgery opened the path for countless others, creating a new dialogue between donor and recipient. The body's acceptance, earned through slow negotiation. In 1956, Arthur Kornberg discovered DNA polymerase, an enzyme responsible for copying DNA. This molecular machine moves along DNA strands, adding nucleotides in a precise sequence, ensuring accurate replication. It acts like a watchful scribe, transcribing genetic code with near-perfect fidelity. Kornberg's work revealed the mechanics behind heredity's continuity. It was a molecular whisper, slow, steady, reliable, enabling life to persist through countless generations, cell by cell. Between 1959 and 1960, scientists elucidated the structure of hemoglobin, the oxygen-carrying protein in red blood cells. Its quaternary structure revealed 4 subunits, each holding a heme group with an iron atom at its center. Hemoglobin's shape allows it to bind oxygen in the lungs and release it in tissues. This allosteric behavior is a gentle balancing act, responsive to subtle chemical cues like pH and carbon dioxide levels. The protein is not static. It breathes, shifts, and cooperates in a slow, molecular dance sustaining life's quiet rhythm. From 1960 to 1965, physicists predicted the existence of the cosmic neutrino background, a relic sea of neutrinos from the early universe. These elusive particles barely interact with matter, passing through planets, stars, and humans unnoticed. They carry a whisper from moments after the Big Bang, cooling and spreading through space. Detecting them remains a challenge. Their presence is inferred, a ghostly residue woven into cosmic fabric. The neutrino background is a silent testament to the universe's infancy, quietly preserving its earliest moments in invisible waves. In 1960, the first laser came to life, not with a bang, but with a quiet coherence of light. Theodore Mimon's ruby laser produced a beam of photons, all marching in step, identical in wavelength and phase. This light was not scattered or diffuse, but focused and pure. Lasers operate by stimulated emission, where excited atoms release photons that nudge others to join the dance. This beam could cut, measure, or communicate, but always with precision and calm. It was a light whisper, crafted from quantum rules, and a promise of countless applications to come. It began, humbly, in a lab surrounded by mirrors and ruby crystals, an elegant alignment of energy and reflection. What followed was decades of soft beams lighting our surgeries, scanners, and fibers, each one a sliver of coherence in a world otherwise filled with flicker. Around 1964, particle physics turned inward, as theorists proposed the existence of quarks, tiny constituents making up protons and neutrons. Murray Gell-Mann and George Zweig independently introduced this idea, suggesting that hadrons were not elementary but composite. Quarks came in flavors such as up, down, and strange, and carried fractional electric charges. They are never found alone, bound by the strong force. This theory was subtle and abstract, lacking immediate experimental proof but forming a deep structure beneath visible matter. A quiet architecture, humming within the heart of atoms. Their names, charm, top, bottom, were oddly whimsical, like a secret language spoken only by particles. A reminder that sometimes, even the smallest things need nicknames to be remembered by sleepy physicists. That same year, Peter Higgs and others proposed the Higgs mechanism, a concept explaining how particles gain mass. The universe, according to this theory, is filled with a pervasive field, the Higgs field, and particles interact with it, slowing down and acquiring mass, much like a swimmer moving through honey. This idea was not obvious or visible but essential. The associated particle, the Higgs boson, was a long-sought whisper finally confirmed decades later. The Higgs mechanism softly answered why some particles weigh something, and others don't, an invisible hand shaping reality's fabric. It took a particle collider 27 kilometers wide to find the proof, a sleepy loop under Switzerland, spinning protons like drowsy dancers until they touched the mystery. Between 1966 and 1968, geneticists uncovered Okazaki fragments, short segments of DNA synthesized discontinuously on the lagging strand during replication. DNA polymerase cannot copy both strands continuously, so the lagging strand is built piece by piece. These fragments, later joined by DNA ligase, ensure the entire genome is faithfully copied. The process is slow and methodical, a staggered relay rather than a smooth march. It highlights the elegance and complexity of life's replication machinery, tiny steps in a precise, rhythmic sequence. Each fragment is a brief thought in the cell's deep memory, an interlude of order, waiting to be stitched into the larger scroll of life. In the early 1970s, discovery followed discovery. Between 1970 and 1973, restriction enzymes, molecular scissors, were found. These proteins cut DNA at specific sequences, allowing bacteria to defend against viral invaders. Scientists quickly realized they could harness these enzymes to cut and paste DNA, the foundation for genetic engineering. This was not an abrupt revolution but a quiet unlocking of nature's toolbox. With restriction enzymes, DNA became manipulable text. A slow rewrite of the language of life. One snip at a time, the alphabet of genes became editable, letting humanity softly edit the code it had only just begun to read. In 1971, the first computer virus named Creeper appeared on ARPANET, the precursor to the Internet. Creeper was designed to move from one computer to another, displaying a simple message: "I'm the Creeper, catch me if you can." Unlike modern malicious viruses, Creeper was more of a playful experiment, spreading gently across network nodes. It marked the beginning of cybersecurity challenges. A tiny ghost in the machine, quietly reminding us that networks can carry not only information but also unseen passengers. It left no damage, only curiosity. Just a flickering signpost on the sleepy path toward digital vigilance. Mathematics found new rhythms between 1975 and 1982 as Benoit Mandelbrot developed the theory of fractals, shapes that repeat their complexity at every scale. Coastlines, clouds, and plants all show fractal patterns. These forms are not smooth or simple but endlessly intricate, like infinite whispers folded into themselves. Fractals describe nature's irregularity with precision and calm. Their equations invite the eye to wander, slowly, through repeating detail. A gentle geometry of complexity. Mandelbrot's work turned fuzziness into form, giving language to shapes too unruly for Euclid, but just orderly enough to resemble a dream remembered in pieces. Closely related, chaos theory, formalized between 1975 and 1983, described how small changes in initial conditions could lead to vastly different outcomes, a phenomenon sometimes called the butterfly effect. But chaos is not randomness, it is deterministic unpredictability. Systems like weather, populations, or fluids follow underlying rules, yet remain sensitive and complex. This theory gently cautions us about limits of prediction. A slow unfolding of order within apparent disorder, where patterns emerge softly over time. Chaos theory asks us to look again, and again, into turbulent waters, and trust that even in motion, something constant might be hiding in plain sight. From 1981 to 1986, the scanning tunneling microscope was developed, allowing us to see and manipulate individual atoms on surfaces. Unlike traditional microscopes, it uses quantum tunneling, where electrons jump across a tiny gap, creating an image based on current variations. This device works silently, scanning point by point, revealing the atomic landscape with astonishing resolution. It transformed nanotechnology from imagination to reality, enabling slow, deliberate crafting of matter, atom by atom. The tip of the microscope, narrower than a single atom, traces invisible contours, like a needle reading the braille of existence. Between 1982 and 1997, Stanley Prusiner discovered prions, infectious proteins capable of causing neurodegenerative diseases. Unlike viruses or bacteria, prions contain no genetic material. They replicate by inducing normal proteins to misfold into harmful shapes. This process is slow and insidious, leading to conditions like Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Prions challenged assumptions about infection, revealing a shadowy world of protein folding. A silent, molecular miscommunication, unfolding over years. And yet, they remind us how fragile shape can be, how a single curl or twist can make the difference between thought and silence. In the mid-1980s, from 1983 to 1985, the polymerase chain reaction, PCR, was invented by Kary Mullis. PCR is a method to amplify tiny amounts of DNA exponentially through repeated cycles of heating and cooling. Each cycle doubles the amount of DNA, turning a single molecule into millions in a matter of hours. It is a methodical, rhythmic process, like a quiet, repeated chant. PCR revolutionized genetics, forensics, and medicine, allowing us to read and copy life's code with delicate precision. Even the tiniest trace, a fallen eyelash, a drop of rain, could now whisper its genetic story to anyone listening slowly enough. Between 1985 and 1990, chemists discovered fullerenes, carbon molecules shaped like hollow spheres, tubes, or ellipsoids. The most famous, C60, resembles a soccer ball made of 60 carbon atoms linked in pentagons and hexagons. Fullerenes are stable, with unique electronic properties. They opened the field of nanomaterials, promising innovations from electronics to medicine. These molecules are tiny cages of carbon, quietly stable, waiting to be explored. Their discovery is a reminder that even the simplest elements can form complex, delicate structures. The universe, after all, is built not just on chaos or law, but on elegant little shapes with nowhere to be. Between 1986 and 1994, one of mathematics' oldest unsolved puzzles quietly met its resolution. Fermat's last theorem, first scribbled in the margin of a 17th-century book, claimed that no three whole numbers a, b, and c could satisfy the equation n plus bn equals c to the power of n plus b to the power of n equals c to the power of n plus bn equals cn for any n greater than 2. For centuries, it waited. Unprovable. Teasing. Then Andrew Wiles, after years of private, patient work, built a proof using the gentle scaffolding of elliptic curves and modular forms. It was not a short proof, nor easy, but it was complete. A whisper closed a chapter that had murmured for over 350 years. From 1990 to 2003, the Human Genome Project unfolded with astonishing patience. This global effort aimed to read, base by base, the entire sequence of human DNA. Over 3 billion letters. Each one a simple molecule, but together forming the entire operating code of life. Scientists mapped chromosomes, identified genes, and uncovered repetitions, silences, and patterns. It was not fast, but it was precise. sequencing, comparing, confirming. The project concluded with more questions than answers, but with a blueprint. A slow, winding path through the spirals of our cells, quietly tucked between every cell. In 1991, researchers began exploring the curious strength and shape of carbon nanotubes, cylindrical structures of carbon atoms, rolled into tiny, seamless tubes. These structures are light and unimaginably strong, conductive, yet narrow as a whisper. Their applications unfolded slowly throughout the 1990s and beyond, spanning materials, electronics, and medicine. Nanotubes are not new atoms, just old ones, curved differently, like graphite, but tighter. Like steel, but softer. Their strength is measured in gigapascals, but their beauty is in symmetry. A structure so small, it has no corners, only a song of carbon in cylindrical silence. Just a year later, in 1992, astronomers made a quiet announcement. They had found something beyond. Exoplanets, planets orbiting stars outside our solar system, were detected for the first time around a pulsar, then around a main sequence star in 1995. These were not bright or clear discoveries. They came as tiny wobbles in starlight. Minute shifts in radial velocity. Like a whisper beneath a cosmic hum. But they hinted at something enormous, the idea that other worlds, not unlike our own, drifted quietly through space. The universe, it seemed, was even less alone than we had imagined. Between 1993 and 1997, the concept of quantum teleportation took shape, not as science fiction, but as a mathematical and physical process rooted in entanglement. Quantum bits, or qubits, cannot be copied, but their state can be transferred, if entangled particles are used as the bridge. The original particle state is destroyed, but recreated elsewhere. It is not movement. It is transformation. A gentle disappearing and appearing. Nothing tangible travels, yet everything is changed. A quantum whisper, carried on correlations, not through space, but through shared mystery. In 1996, a single sheep changed biotechnology forever. Dolly was the first mammal cloned from an adult somatic cell, using a technique called somatic cell nuclear transfer. The nucleus of a mammary cell was inserted into an egg whose own nucleus had been removed. The egg grew, divided, and became a lamb. It was slow. It was uncertain. But it worked. Dolly lived quietly, and her cells carried the quiet echo of another adult sheep. A copy. Not perfect, but complete. Cloning, once only imagined, had found a sleepy pasture in reality. Then, in 1998, astronomers studying distant supernovae noticed something unsettlingly calm. The expansion of the universe wasn't slowing down. It was speeding up. The cause, dark energy. A name without a face. A gentle repulsion, not attraction. A pressure embedded in the vacuum itself. It accounts for most of the universe, and yet, it cannot be touched. only inferred. Like wind without rustling leaves. Its presence stretches space with soft insistence. A quiet force pulling galaxies apart, silently. In the early 2000s, another amplification method was gently uncovered. Between 2000 and 2008, loop-mediated isothermal amplification, or LAMP, was developed. Unlike PCR, which needs thermal cycling, LAMP works at one steady temperature, warm, but constant. It amplifies DNA using primers that loop back on themselves, creating long, tangled chains of replicated sequences. The reaction is fast. But its mechanism is looping, lazy, almost like dueling with enzymes. It requires no fancy machines. Just warmth, and time. A sleepy swirl of replication, humming in a water. Then in 2004, scientists isolated graphene, a single sheet of carbon atoms arranged in a two-dimensional honeycomb lattice. One atom thick, yet stronger than steel. Transparent, yet conductive. It was peeled from graphite using ordinary tape. So simple. So precise. A quiet sheet of atomic perfection. Graphene's discovery promised applications in everything from transistors to flexible screens. But its true magic is in its flatness. A lattice so perfect, electrons move through it like whispers on glass. It's not just material. It's silence. Structured. Between 2005 and 2010, neuroscience quietly opened a new window into the brain, optogenetics. By inserting light-sensitive proteins into specific neurons, scientists could control brain activity using flashes of light. A pulse. And a cell fires. A pause. And it rests. This technique allowed experiments with an eerie precision. Not electric shocks or chemicals. Just light. Flickering through the mind like stars through fog. It's not mind control. It's mind listening. A dance of impulses and photons. Timed. Gentle. Illuminating thought without words. And most recently, though the stars never rush, came an image so soft, it took 15 years to prepare. Between 2007 and 2022, the James Webb Space Telescope was built, launched, aligned, and finally unveiled its first deep-field images. These were not photographs of drama. They were slow portraits of galaxies, seen as they were billions of years ago. A speck of sky revealed thousands of ancient lights. Infrared eyes peered back in time. The image was quiet. But inside it was time folded into light. A deep exhale from the universe itself. Between 2009 and 2018, the Kepler mission gazed at a tiny patch of sky and listened for planetary shadows. This space telescope did not photograph planets. It watched stars, patiently, for dips in their light. When a planet passed in front, a star would dim, just slightly, and then brighten again. From this whisper of shadow, Kepler revealed thousands of exoplanets. Some small, some large, some in the soft zone where water could stay liquid. These were not images, but hints. Faint eclipses, gentle patterns in light. And yet, each one was a world. Between 2011 and 2013, the first bionic eye was implanted. Not to restore full sight, but to open a doorway. The Argus II retinal prosthesis translated light into electrical signals, fed to a tiny electrode array on the retina. The brain remembered enough to make sense of these dots. Not pictures, but perceptions. Outlines. Movement. A lamp where once was dark. The implant did not bring color, or clarity. But it brought form. And that was a beginning. A synthetic scene. Delicate and slow. Then, in the early 2010s, a small pair, Cas9 and CRISPR, entered the scene. Between 2012 and 2013, scientists repurposed a bacterial defense system into a tool for gene editing. CRISPR guides the way. Cas9 does the cutting. Together, they allow DNA to be altered at precise locations. Not randomly, but intentionally. Quietly. A correction here. A removal there. The genome became an editable sentence, no longer fixed. The method is elegant, like scissors following a map. And though it began in simplicity, it reshaped what it meant to edit life. And just a year later, in 2013, a hamburger quietly sizzled in a pan. Without ever coming from a cow. The first lab-grown meat, cultured from muscle cells, was created in a dish. Fed with nutrients. Grown slowly, like a biological bread rising under heat. It did not moo. It did not graze. But it was, in structure, real meat. Its creation was not yet scalable. Not cheap. But symbolic. A meal. Uncoupled from animal. Flesh. Without blood. It whispered of future farms without fields. In parallel, from 2013 to 2020, rockets learned to land. SpaceX developed reusable orbital launch vehicles, first the Falcon 9. These rockets rose skyward, detached, and then returned. Not in wreckage, but in upright, quiet landings on ocean barges. As if stepping back to Earth. This changed spaceflight's rhythm. No more single use. No more debris. It became circular, rhythmic. Rockets that could return and rise again. A loop. Like breath. Like tides. A lullaby in orbital engineering. In 2016, the board game Go, a realm of intuition and complexity, met its quiet match. DeepMind's AlphaGo, an artificial intelligence system, defeated champion Lee Sedol in a series of calm, unblinking games. Go had long resisted computers. Its strategy is deep, its board vast. But AlphaGo learned through self-play. It made moves no human would have considered. And won. Not with aggression, but with serene precision. The machine had no eyes, no nerves. And yet, it read the board more deeply than we could. From 2016 to 2020, another puzzle met its silent solver. AlphaFold, also by DeepMind, learned to predict how proteins fold. These molecules twist and loop in 3 dimensions, folding into structures essential for life. The task had stumped scientists for decades. But AlphaFold, trained on known shapes, began to predict unseen ones. It did not handle molecules with fingers. It handled them with math. And through that math, it glimpsed the curled complexity of biology. Fold by fold. Whisper by whisper. In those same years, something even quieter began to speak, directly into the brain. Between 2016 and 2023, Neuralink and others advanced brain-computer interfaces. These devices, small, electrode-threaded systems, were designed to record neural activity and perhaps one day transmit it. Thought, translated into signal. Signal, into motion. The early versions read spikes and pulses. Not dreams, not memories, but the building blocks of thought. Slowly. Carefully. A whisper tapped directly from the brain's soft electric tide. Also between 2016 and 2020, the first CRISPR-based human trials took place. These were not dreams of designer traits. They were small, cautious interventions, treating diseases like sickle cell anemia by editing bone marrow cells. The changes were internal and personal. The results were monitored over months and years. This was not overnight medicine. It was a slow, cellular dialogue. A new kind of treatment, whispered not to the body, but to its very instructions. In another quiet corner of science, an enzyme began to nibble. From 2016 to 2023, scientists engineered plastic-eating enzymes capable of breaking down polyethylene terephthalate, PET, a common plastic. These enzymes were based on those found in bacteria near recycling plants. But now, they were faster, more stable. They digested plastic, not in decades, but in days. Not with heat or acid, but with shape. A curl. A pocket. a quiet bite. And through this, something synthetic became biodegradable. A slow apology to the earth. And not to forget, in this gentle handful, we arrive at a quantum sigh. Between 2017 and 2020, physicists demonstrated long-range quantum entanglement, over 1,000 kilometers. Two particles, linked in their properties, remained correlated across this distance. A change in one was reflected in the other. Not by signal, not by speed, but by sameness. Entanglement is not communication. It is connection. Quiet. Invisible. Unbroken by space. These experiments did not shatter expectations. They softened them. Entanglement became a thread, invisible, but taut across the void. Between 2017 and 2019, quantum supremacy was quietly declared. This term means a quantum computer performed a calculation faster than any known classical machine could. Google's Sycamore processor completed a task in mere minutes, one that might take even the fastest supercomputer thousands of years. But the task itself was not useful. It was chosen for speed, not purpose. And yet, the significance was profound. A whisper that quantum systems could outpace our expectations. A signpost on a road still long and winding. The dawn of a new architecture, humming softly in probabilities, not certainties. In parallel, from 2017 to 2024, solid-state batteries advanced. Quietly, but meaningfully. Unlike traditional lithium-ion batteries, these use a solid electrolyte instead of a liquid. No sloshing. No leaks. Just structure. These batteries promise higher energy density, longer life, and greater safety. But their progress was not sudden. Materials had to be discovered, tested, balanced. Dendrites, tiny metal growths, had to be tamed. And so, researchers worked like gardeners of ions, pruning, layering, and waiting. Their dream? A battery as still and stable as stone. A reservoir of power, without a ripple. Between 2018 and 2022, a new kind of conversation began. ChatGPT, a large language model built on the GPT architecture, grew into public consciousness. But this was not a robot with thoughts. It was a mirror of patterns. Trained on oceans of text, it learned to predict the next word, and then the next. It does not feel. It does not understand. But it flows. Syntactically, rhythmically, eerily human. Like a library that learned to hum. It is not intelligence, but imitation. And in that imitation lies something remarkably useful, and occasionally poetic, a soft echo of the world's own words. Meanwhile, In the space between biology and robotics, something squirmed into existence. Between 2018 and 2020, scientists created xenobots, tiny, programmable living cells. Using frog skin and heart tissue, they assembled self-moving blobs that could carry tiny payloads, push particles, and even self-repair. No circuits. No wires. Just cells, arranged with care, obeying their own gentle chemistry. They are not truly machines. Nor animals. But something between. A new class of soft-bodied tools. Small as sand grains. And almost silent in purpose. Not made, but grown. And guided. From 2018 to 2023, satellites began listening. Not for voices, but for tremors. Earthquake early warning systems expanded their reach by using remote sensing from above. Tiny shifts in ground motion, detected from orbit, began to feed alerts into systems that could warn cities seconds before a quake struck. Not enough to stop a quake, but enough to open doors. Pause trains. Hold elevators. The sky. Listening to the crust below. A gentle tension between rock and air. A conversation between Earth and the edge of space. In 2019, GPT-2 arrived, an earlier sibling of ChatGPT. This model was notable, not for its output, but for the concern it sparked. It was large. It was fluent. It could generate plausible articles, poems, recipes. And so, its full release was delayed. Not because it was dangerous, but because its fluency was unsettling. This language model could not think, but it could echo. And in its echo, some saw promise. Others, uncertainty. It was a soft, synthetic voice, emerging from pure statistics, a whisper of what machines might almost seem to know. Between 2019 and 2023, scientists attempted something immensely complex, simulating a cell. Completely in silico. Every reaction. Every gene. Every metabolite. Modeled and tracked by code. This was not a sketch of biology. It was a system. A digital mimic of life's machinery, running in software. Each ribosome, each enzyme, each membrane, made of data. And while not perfect, it offered a mirror. A place to experiment without harming life. A sandbox. For simulated cells. As if biology paused to catch its reflection. In the field of medicine, something hopeful stirred. Between 2020 and 2022, gene therapy for Tay-Sachs disease, a fatal neurological disorder, showed its first success in humans. Using viruses as gentle couriers, working genes were inserted into patient cells. This did not reverse damage already done, but it slowed decline, brought clarity, brought hope. The therapy moved through the bloodstream, like a coded whisper. It was not a cure, but it was a pause, a breath, a beginning, a turning point in a story long thought unchangeable. Between 2020 and 2023, artificial intelligence began discovering antibiotics, not by accident, but by simulation. Models were trained to search vast molecular spaces, looking for structures that could disrupt bacterial growth. This approach yielded compounds never seen before by human eyes. One AI-designed drug, Halicin, showed promise against resistant strains. These were not guesses. They were probabilities. Folded, weighted, selected by machine logic. The fight against bacteria gained a silent ally, a partner who reads molecules like verses. At the National Ignition Facility, between 2021 and 2022, fusion achieved a long-awaited milestone: ignition. For the first time, more energy emerged from the fusion reaction than was absorbed by the fuel. A tiny sun in a chamber. Lasers focused with tremendous precision onto a pellet of hydrogen isotopes, causing them to fuse. The result: a flash of light, a whisper of plasma. This was not power for the grid, but it was proof that fusion could burn quietly and give more than it took, a promise flickering inside a capsule no bigger than a thimble. And from 2021 to 2024, a slower revolution took shape. Large language models were applied to drug discovery. The task is enormous, finding molecules that heal, out of billions that don't. But LLMs were not searching blindly. They were trained to suggest, to refine, to imagine. A new chemical, proposed by pattern, then tested in labs. Not one drug, but thousands of possibilities. Generated with the soft flicker of digital thought. A new kind of lab assistant, fluent in molecules and silence. Between 2022 and 2023, large language models like Claude and ChatGPT began to quietly cross early artificial general intelligence benchmarks, tests meant to assess reasoning, synthesis, and problem-solving beyond simple pattern repetition. These models wrote functional code, solved puzzles, summarized scientific literature, and even debated complex ethical prompts with fluency. While still narrow in architecture and limited by training data, their performance was startlingly flexible across domains. They didn't understand like humans do, but they behaved as if they could. The difference between simulation and cognition blurred slightly. Not because the machine gained consciousness, but because its statistical structure began to perform general tasks convincingly, again and again, without pause or fatigue. In 2022 and 2023, researchers succeeded in creating synthetic embryos, models of early mammalian development built not from fertilization, but from stem cells nudged into form. These cell clusters self-assembled into embryo-like structures with tissue layers, rudimentary organs, and basic axes of organization. No sperm. No egg. Just instructions, scaffolded by chemical gradients and cellular memory. The embryos were not viable, but they were astonishing. They modeled the first steps of life without needing a parent. They offered insight into fertility, pregnancy, and the orchestration of development. It wasn't reproduction. It was construction. A glimpse of nature's core. From 2023 onward, a new kind of AI emerged, one that didn't just read and write, but also saw, heard, and responded across multiple senses. GPT-4o and other multimodal systems learned to blend language with images, audio, and gesture. You could speak to it, and it could draw. You could show it a chart, and it could explain. A camera image could become a paragraph. A sentence could become a melody. These models didn't simply switch between modalities, they fused them. Comprehension expanded across media. The result felt fluid, almost seamless. Not human. But something newly whole. A single system. Absorbing the world in layers. Between 2023 and 2025, Project Bellwether began to quietly transform molecular biology. Rather than waiting for evolution to stumble on useful proteins, scientists asked neural networks to imagine them. These AI systems generated completely novel amino acid sequences, never found in nature, that folded into stable, functional proteins. Some acted as enzymes for hypothetical reactions. Others formed the basis for new kinds of drugs or materials. The process was guided by design, not inheritance. Proteins were no longer discovered. They were authored. Imagined in silico, then synthesized in wet labs. The alphabet of life. Rearranged by artificial minds. In the same window, DARPA initiated its Dragonfly trials, a testbed for long-range, secure quantum communication. Using entangled photons, researchers transmitted correlations between distant points, data that, in theory, could not be intercepted or copied. Between 2023 and 2025, small prototype networks blinked into operation, exchanging information not as signals, but as shared quantum states. There were no cables. No traditional encryption. Just delicate states of light, linked invisibly across space. It was not the internet as we knew it. It was a quiet experiment in trust, built on uncertainty itself. The network listened, but through entanglement, not wires. In weather science, something uncanny arrived between 2023 and 2024. A deep learning model called GraphCast began outperforming traditional meteorological simulations. It was trained not on physics equations, but on massive archives of real weather data. Given the current state of the atmosphere, it predicted the next, faster and often more accurately than models that required enormous computing power. It didn't simulate the world. It remembered it. Pattern by pattern. No equations. Just precedent. The model made forecasts that felt intuitive, yet precise. A memory system for air, for rain, for storm. A new kind of weatherman. Silent, statistical, and astonishingly fast. At the same time, artificial intelligence was being used to search through materials that had never existed. Between 2023 and 2025, researchers applied deep models to discover new molecular structures, particularly those that could capture and store carbon dioxide. These were not ordinary searches. Simulations ran at enormous scales, evaluating millions of molecular configurations. From this sea of possibilities emerged frameworks, crystals, and porous membranes, designed by prediction, not trial. AI became a chemist that never tired, never blinked, and never forgot a promising scaffold. Carbon capture, once a challenge of chemistry, became a matter of pattern recognition. By 2025, vaccines were whispering a new kind of instruction into the body. Built on mRNA, the same technology used to fight COVID-19, these new formulations did something gentler: they trained the immune system not to attack. Specifically, they targeted autoimmune conditions like type 1 diabetes, where the body mistakes its own cells for invaders. These vaccines offered no brute force, just tolerance. A message delivered cell to cell, encouraging peace instead of war. It was not just medicine, it was diplomacy. Written in molecular language. Injected quietly. A bid for internal harmony. Between 2023 and 2024, artificial intelligence turned its attention to a slower kind of disease, type 2 diabetes. Researchers trained models on massive health datasets to forecast the future of individual patients. Not just who would get sick, but when and how. The models integrated glucose levels, lifestyle data, medications, and time. What emerged was a predictive engine, like a map that unfolded gradually, warning doctors of declines before they appeared. It wasn't a cure. It was foresight. A statistical whisper about what might come next, years in advance. Not destiny, but trajectory. And a chance to gently adjust course. In 2024, a new tool entered the genetic editing toolkit, CRISPR-Cas9, a smaller, more compact version of earlier Cas systems. This miniaturized editor could be packaged into tinier delivery systems, including slim viral vectors that fit more easily into cells. The result was greater efficiency, broader accessibility, and precision that reached places bulkier systems couldn't. With Cas9, gene therapy became less invasive. More agile. As if the scalpel had become a needle. And then a whisper. The DNA could be touched, corrected, healed, with less intrusion, and more elegance. Gene editing shrank in size. But grew in promise. By 2025, language models began to function not only as assistants to chemists, but as active collaborators. Given a goal, say, a drug molecule or a catalytic reaction, these models could now suggest steps, predict yields, and troubleshoot failures. They proposed synthetic routes, balanced reagents, and even explained why one path might fail. Their knowledge was broad, but also practical. Like having a seasoned researcher. Distilled into a voice. These models did not replace chemists. But they accelerated them. They turned experimentation into conversation. The lab bench gained a second mind. Fluent in reaction, solvent, structure, and suggestion. Between 2024 and 2025, a quieter kind of project began in parallel to AI's outward expansion, the alignment labs. Organizations like Anthropic and OpenAI launched open-source initiatives to explore how to make powerful language models and general AI systems more aligned with human values, safety, and ethical constraints. These weren't labs for invention. They were for interpretation, for setting limits, defining defaults, anticipating edge cases. The goal wasn't brilliance. It was wisdom. And humility. To build a brain. And teach it restraint. These labs didn't announce truths. They asked questions. Slowly. Patiently. Together. Because power alone was not enough. Programmable RNA-based cell therapies entered their first human trials in 2024 and continued cautiously into 2025. These therapies do not alter DNA, but instead rely on custom-built RNA instructions, delivered into living cells like biological software updates. Once inside, these RNAs can guide cells to produce specific proteins, regulate immune responses, or temporarily shift cellular behavior, without permanent genetic change. This programmability offers flexibility and control, ideal for conditions like cancer or autoimmune diseases, where timing and context are everything. It's not rewiring the body, but softly retuning it, one line of molecular code at a time. In 2024, astronomers began simulating atmospheres of Earth-like exoplanets using powerful telescopes and planetary models. As spectra arrived from distant worlds, researchers layered chemistry over light, building theoretical skies from faint signals. Could carbon dioxide hint at volcanism? Might methane suggest life? These were not pictures of planets, but whispers of gases, modeled with care. The simulations, running through 2025, did not offer proof of habitability, only probability. Yet each model narrowed the vastness. Each rendered world became less unknown. Through starlight and silence, science began guessing the weather on planets we'll never touch. By 2025, physicists at CERN and partner institutes turned to cold atom simulators in an effort to explore quantum gravity, one of physics' deepest puzzles. Using ultracold atoms arranged in precise lattices, researchers mimic conditions thought to exist at the smallest, most extreme scales of the universe. These analog systems, frozen to near absolute zero, revealed hints of how space and time might behave when quantized. It was not gravity directly, but a reflection of it, a kind of dream version, chilled and slowed, playing out in miniature. These experiments are early, delicate. But they reach boldly into the structure of everything. Also in 2025, AI models began folding proteins specifically for rare diseases, conditions with too few patients to attract traditional drug research. These neural networks were trained on evolutionary patterns and structural logic, not just to guess how natural proteins bend, but to design new ones from scratch. Some were enzymes. Others, scaffolds for binding. They were shaped in silico, with goals, not discovered, but proposed. And once proposed, synthesized. In this collaboration between human intent and machine suggestion, rare became less neglected. Complexity bowed gently to clarity. Each fold, a message of hope tucked inside a molecular shape. The Global Artificial Photosynthesis Project, launched in 2025, aimed to mimic the quiet efficiency of leaves, capturing sunlight and carbon dioxide, but with engineered systems. Teams around the world coordinated efforts to develop scalable, stable, and cost-effective materials that could absorb light, split water, and fix carbon. These systems don't grow. They don't bloom. But they convert air and sun into fuel, quietly, steadily, like nature, yet faster. The challenge was not invention, but coordination. To build an artificial forest that does not shade, but shines. Not green, but glowing. A new rhythm for the carbon cycle, engineered with care. As deep learning matured, researchers in 2025 turned toward a hybrid vision, neurosymbolic AGI. This approach combined the fluid intuition of neural networks with the structured reasoning of symbolic logic, offering not just pattern recognition, but explainable inference. These systems could learn from raw data and also manipulate abstract relationships, handling puzzles, rules, analogies. It was not just imitation anymore. It was the blending of learning and thinking. A slow confluence of perception and planning. AGI, if it emerges, may not arrive in a rush of insight, but in the quiet marriage of two traditions, long seen as rivals. Neural and logical. In 2025, quantum researchers began piloting cryogenic quantum annealing to optimize complex logistical problems, like shipping routes, energy grids, or protein folding. Unlike general-purpose quantum computers, these systems were built for one task: to find low-energy solutions in massive, tangled problem spaces. At ultra-cold temperatures, qubits slowly settled into optimal configurations. The machines didn't compute traditionally. They drifted, gently, toward simplicity. These early trials offered hints, not answers. But where classical computers chugged through permutations, these systems whispered across possibilities. Cold, quiet shortcuts, glimpses of speed not from force, but from stillness. Meanwhile, researchers continued exploring long-range RNA therapeutics, especially for neurodegenerative diseases. Traditional treatments struggle to cross the blood-brain barrier or to modify complex pathways gently. But RNA, if stabilized and precisely delivered, can slip inside cells and instruct them to silence toxic genes or express protective ones. These aren't one-time edits, but tunable messages, adjustable, pausable. In 2025, preclinical trials moved slowly forward, with careful attention to safety and delivery. Hope rides on this molecular dialogue. A medicine that doesn't force change, but suggests it. Soft messages to damaged neurons, carried on threads of biochemistry. AI joined the climate crisis more intimately in 2025 through an initiative led by UNEP and global partner labs. These systems model not just average temperatures, but regional collapses, economic tipping points, migratory waves, risks with jagged, complex timelines. Traditional climate models struggle with these nonlinearities. But AI embraced them. It mapped not only outcomes, but uncertainties. It asked, if this, then what? And how soon? These simulations didn't offer certainty. They offered foresight. Scenarios painted not in panic, but in detail. Like time-lapse warnings, rendered pixel by pixel. By a mind made of pattern. Also in 2025, large language models were trained not just on human texts, but on live sensor data from Earth systems, seismographs, buoys, satellites, air monitors. These models learned to interpret signals directly, transforming numbers into narratives, anomalies into alerts. A volcano murmured. A coral reef paled. A glacier cracked. The LLMs listened. They didn't replace scientists, but served as translators, surfacing subtle shifts early. What once lived buried in datasets now spoke aloud. The Earth, too, began to tell its story. And machine language, strange and soft, became part of the voice. And now, we drift into the closing quiet. You do not need to remember these things. You do not need to care. If you listened, even with half a thought, that is more than enough. These unremarkable facts, these ancient and new scientific discoveries, have kept us company for thousands of years. And tonight, they may gently settle in your mind, like ash in an old hearth. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.